Hey, hi Anand. Hi, hello everyone. Let's get started. Good evening to one and all. And it's my honor to introduce Anand, our guest for today. He, there's probably a lot of things that Anand has achieved, and this may fall short of his contributions to the startup world in general. But I will take a minute or two to introduce Anand to all of you. Anand is a successful and accomplished entrepreneur whose contributions to the world of startup and entrepreneurship is significant. Anand is a serial entrepreneur who has demonstrated his exceptional skills in building and scaling companies. He co founded Inkle, a startup that has helped many early stage founders to realize their dreams and succeed in highly competitive American market. Anand's impressive resume includes being a Sainsbury scholar and graduating with a BSc in finance from prestigious London School of Economics, followed by a master's degree from the University of Cambridge. He has also participated in the Y Combinator core summer program and played an instrumental role in the early days of YC India. Prior to founding Inkle, Anand exited his startup Index to Tencent backed Neo. With his extensive experience and expertise in entrepreneurship, Anand is a sought after speaker and mentor. He has helped many aspiring entrepreneurs to navigate the complex world of startups and achieve their goals. It is an honor to have Anand with us today, and we look forward to hearing his insights and perspectives on exiting an ever evolving world of entrepreneurship. Anand, over to you to enlighten our founders about how do you run things in your part of the world. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Raksha, and thanks, Elson, and thanks to Let's Venture and Scalix for inviting me here. I feel very honored to be here. Um, that introduction, Raksha, is way too generous. So, but thank you for setting the tone very high, which I have to live up to now. So great. Yeah, thanks all for joining here and listening in to me. I'd love to make this interactive, so please keep posting comments, questions, etc. Anything you need, please shout out, come on stage as well. I'm not gonna present like a deck or anything. I'm just gonna present some notes that I've started making up on a Google Doc. We'll go through some scenarios together, and I'll keep it short. And then we'll dive into more questions. Yeah. So okay, so let's start with kind of around impact of the changes recently onto how folks will think about incorporation. Now, why do people consider incorporating in the US? And have those reasons changed after the recent trend of reverse flips? Right? When we think about where to incorporate, there's really only two options or three options for Indian founders, right? There's obviously India, there's Singapore, and there's the US. Have the incorporation reasons in the US changed, like customer access, investor access, payment ease in US dollars, US bank account, global holdco, hubbies, the social proof, the stronger IP protection? Have any of these changed recently? I don't think so, right? Even after the union budget changes, and even after the kind of recent ODI changes, I don't think any of that really changed any of this. Right? These reasons still persist, and they will do for a long time, I think. Right? That said, PhonePe was an interesting case in point, where when PhonePe came to its massive exit, which is forthcoming, they chose to reverse flip. Right? They were originally in Singapore. They chose to come back to India, right, and float on the Bombay Stock Exchange. Right. So why did they do that? And also, when they did that, they lost $1 billion of value through taxation, and they lost probably kind of all the benefits of being abroad. But at the same time, very interestingly, they got contacted by 20 out of more than 100 unicorn founders who were also interested in flipping back to India, right? Reverse flipping. That's due to governmental pressure. The BJP government has made clear that they want folks to reverse flip like that. So that's kind of an interesting trend, which I noticed recently. I thought I'd mention that. Right? But none of that has changed the reasons to incorporate a US entity. That said, let's talk about whether it's US parent or US subsidiary. With US parent, it's difficult. We'll talk briefly about why it's difficult. US subsidiary is not difficult, and it gives all the same things, or many of the same things, that are the benefits of incorporating US parent instead of a US subsidiary. So we'll talk through some of those as well. But let's talk about the methods to do it, right? The gifting method, where you'd get a friend or a family member abroad to create a US entity and then create a subsidiary under it and then gift you the package. That method is now gone. And you can still use method 2 if you have foreign sourced earnings. It's sitting in a foreign bank account, but most people don't in India, right? So then you're left with 3, 4, and 5, right? 3 banks are really saying, for a founder to have massive ESOPs in the US entity, a cross-border entity, is unusual. So people are avoiding that. 4, which is where you set up an LLP in India, which buys a stake in the US entity, which buys a stake in the Indian entity. It's like a triangle, is now the given way. And then there's a brand new way where you get a huge amount of sweat equity in the US entity, which has an Indian subsidiary. So there's 5 ways, and we're seeing now 4 and 5 are kind of the winning ways right now. So that's kind of touching on how to do it and why to do it. And then I'll move on to also raising for it, right? And the go-to market with it, right? So I'm really going to focus on global founders here, but let's talk about who's doing this, right? There's going to be folks who are incorporating in the US for various reasons, right? There'll be 1/3 of my customers, for example, are US B2B, 1/3 are India B2B, and 1/3 are India B2C, but they all have a common thread of having a US parent. Why did they do that? Some for the customer access, obviously US B2B guys, some for the investor access, that's everyone. Even India food delivery app on my platform has a US parent. They have no business in the US, just they wanted investor access. And then some just wanted to have the payment ease, right? An Indian entity billing a US customer, it can be a painful process, rupee being a controlled currency. Getting money into India is actually fairly straightforward, but getting money out of India is quite painful indeed, right? So there's kind of a bunch of considerations around here. I'm happy to go into those more, but I'm going to just keep this brief and then take more questions here. Okay, so that's on the incorporating how and why. I'm going to go into raising as well, and then I'm going to go into GTM. But before I do that, I'm going to take a little pause there and invite any comments, questions, thoughts, and Elson Raksha, if you wish to say any contribute any ideas around it, please let me know. But especially the audience, if there's anyone who wants to say anything, please do feel free. Otherwise, I'll dive straight into the GTM or to the fundraising.
So you were talking about parent and subsidiary, right? I think it'll be great if you can shed a little more light about what a parent would mean and what a subsidiary would mean.
Yeah. So really, a typical example may be a company that thinks about a private limited company in India, right? And says that's enough for me. That's simple. It's India. I can do it. It's straightforward. Any CA or CS in India can set that up for you. 10, 20,000 rupees even you can set up, right? But as a standalone entity, you think about a group of companies will have multiple entities, right? Can that Indian entity access the US market in the same way? It's harder because of the payment needs and the things I talked about. And so what I feel is that companies tend to incorporate a US entity regardless. And what the relationship between the two entities is of utmost importance, right? Either the founder owns both, or A owns B, right? Or even B owns A, right? So in any of those, you get a group relationship, what's called a related party transaction, and related party between the founder and the two entities, right? And that group relationship creates legal issues as well, and compliances and transfer pricing and royalty and all those things. But without touching on those, most importantly, you have this holding company, and then you have a subsidiary. Now, interestingly, the parent or holding company, or topco as they call it sometimes, may be active, right? May be inactive. Right? In my case, for example, I'm a US B2B SaaS company. So my parent is active in the sense that it generates revenue. My India subsidiary is just servicing the parent. Right? It's just got a bunch of employees. The parent doesn't even have employees, but it has revenue. The subsidiary doesn't have any revenue, but it has employees. Right? So that's kind of one of the structures. Another structure might be, again, this food delivery app in Bangalore, which has a parent just to get money, and then a subsidiary which has all the employees and all the revenues and all the expenses. Right? So there are various scenarios depending on what kind of focus the founders want to have. Does that answer your question, Rakshan?
Yeah. Thank
Cool.
you.
All right.
By the way, just to all the other founders, sorry, Anand, just sorry to interrupt.
There's a question from Manhar. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just to all the founders that have joined, just don't hesitate to ask your questions. I think there's one thing that, when it comes to these sort of discussions, we tend to feel like, is my question going to be dumb? I mean, there's no dumb question, right? Because especially in this field, there's a lot of changing things that are happening in terms of policies. And there's no better person than Anand, who is, deep in the trenches. So he knows the latest updates and things like that. So just use the chat section to ask all these questions, and we'd be happy to take them. Over to you, Anand. Sorry about that.
Sure, no, thank you. I think Manohar had a question. If not, then noise. Okay, sure. Manohar, if you wish to ask, please raise your hand again. But otherwise, I'm gonna. Yeah, okay, sure, Manohar, please go ahead. Do we have to invite him on stage or something, Rakshan?
Oh yeah, I guess it's easiest if he puts the question down in the Q&A.
Let's try doing the audio as well. Can you unmute him or can you invite him on stage? Or if you make me the co-host, I can do this.
We'll just do that. Just a second.
Yeah.
The host will have to do. Who's the Let's Venture portfolio host?
Yeah. I'm just pinging. We'll just get that done.
All right, sure. Manhar, just bear with us, or even post the question in the chat if you wish to do that. Oops. Okay, my apologies. Would be better to come on audio as well. Okay, Manhar is saying he wants to come on audio, so if you can enable him, that would be great. In the meantime, let me whilst you fix that up, let me why don't you ask the Let's Venture host to make one of us the hosts or co-hosts? Yeah, Elson, that might be a good step. Okay,
yep. I'm just coordinating.
Sure. In the meantime, let me dive further in. So yeah, to summarize, there are 5 ways to incorporate a US entity. The first way is gone now. And if you have foreign source earnings, great. If you don't have foreign source earnings with a foreign bank account, you can't use 2 anyway. The banks are frowning upon 3. The LLP route and the sweat equity route. Forming a US parent is now the preferred ways. Right? And the reasons, again, persist, as I mentioned. And then we're going to go into a little bit about raising, right? So fundraising, of course, at the time when folks have a need, have traction, have capability to raise and a network to raise, we'll be considering, okay, I have an Indian holding co, right? A holding co, again, top co, holding co, parent co, same thing, but essentially, where is the top level, right? Say the India holds is owning the US or US is owning the India. Either way, like let's go for the holding co, and let's discuss scenarios. Right? So you raise from an Indian AIF, Alternative Investment Fund. This is very straightforward. Right? SEBI-controlled AIFs can invest in Indian entities very easily. Indian angels can easily raise from an Indian into an Indian entity. Right? Foreign angels a little bit harder, but some kind of a little bit of compliance involved, but it's easily possible for a foreign angel to invest in an Indian entity. Now let's talk about global VCs, right? So global VCs can do it, but they tend to be fairly sophisticated ones that are doing it. And you hear about like Tiger or SoftBank investing a huge amount in an Indian private limited company. They've become familiar with it, they know how to do it, and they're comfortable with it, right? But would you hear about a small, US VC investing in an Indian entity? Unlikely, right? They'll probably demand a US parent to invest in it. It's easier for them, right? It's like a UPI transaction for them from US to US, right? So that's kind of why I feel that it depends largely on who you are, where you're focusing, and who you have access to, right? Access is key here. Now let's talk about US entities, right? With the US parent. US entity raising from an Indian AIF. It's hard, these Indian AIFs has threshold of 25% of its fund can invest in foreign entities. Right? Many of those have breached that level. But then you get some of them who have another threshold, which is that 1.5 billion across all AIFs may be invested in US entities. And the SEBI regulates that amount. So if that threshold is also being breached, then it's actually impossible for any fund in India to invest in a US entity until the threshold is reset on the 1st of April. And that happened last year. Then you also get Indian angels investing in US entities. This has become extremely difficult now through the ODI changes imposed in August. I'll talk more about that later. The foreign angels investing in a US entity is obviously very easy, and global VCs investing in a US entity is obviously very easy. So these are kind of some of the scenarios about raising from. I think it all comes down to where you have access, as I said, where you have traction, where you have access, where you have kind of visibility, etc. So please bear this in mind that raising is largely a function of many factors and not just of where you want to raise from, right? Very often I see founders incorporating in the US and then getting locked out, right, from Indian AIFs and Indian angels, because these guys find it difficult to invest in US entities, right? So then they're stuck, the founders are stuck trying to raise from foreign, right? And they can't quite do that because the foreign investors say, hey, hold on, why is there no Indian angels here, right? Or Indian AIFs here? So I've seen this kind of trap as well happening. So it's kind of, you have to be conscious that if you're incorporating in the US, please either have early US revenue or some US traction or a US investor lined up already. Otherwise, yeah, I think it makes sense, a lot of sense, just to incorporate in India and figure things out later. Yeah. Okay, so that's on fundraising. And again, I'm going to pause there and invite questions. We do see Manohar again. Manohar, if you've come online, I'm going to ask you to come online. Manohar, can you hear me? I'm unmuted you.
Yes, are you guys able to hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much for enabling this.
Sure.
So I think in that re-summarization that you quickly did towards the end, it's sort of my question. What has happened in our specific case is that I believe we're going through the LLC route that you have outlined.
LP, I think, yeah.
I wanted to basically ask you, given that this is a more recent opportunity, which is not an opportunity, but a more recent approach that more startups would have taken post the August changes in ODI. Have you seen a lot of startups using this approach, basically to set up an LLP in India and then to have a US entity? And then that US entity could possibly have a step down subsidiary back in India as a private limited company.
Yeah, for sure. It's Manar, it's an important point. Like literally, I would say most of the companies now incorporating in US are using the LLP route. There is no other route, right? Which is possible for many of these folks, right? So if we go back to this list here, the gifting route's gone. Most folks don't have US foreign source earnings in a foreign bank account, right?
Right.
So those two are gone, right? And then most folks, have a bank which is not comfortable with this. Right? So what is the ESOP route? It's where the Indian founder gets like 50% of the US entity as an ESOP. That's unheard of. Frankly, founders shouldn't even get ESOPs, right? Founders get common stock, right? It's the employees that get ESOPs. So it looks totally weird for for a founder to have even a small ESOP, what to speak of like half of the company as an ESOP, right?
Right.
That's why this route is frowned upon by certain banks, and we've seen certain VCs as well have refused. I know two of India's biggest VCs have absolutely refused this structure to invest in this in the structure that has gone through this. And so then you're left with 4 and 5, right? And 4 and 5 are interestingly not vastly different. The only difference is that in 4, you set up an Indian LLP, right, which owns the US parent, which owns an Indian subsidiary private limited. Right? So it's that triangle I spoke about, right? It's kind of weird, but it's a lot of entities flying around, a lot of admin, a lot of paperwork, a lot of tax filings. but it's the only way right now that's flying. The other new kind of route, and Anil Advani at Inventors Law is the one you should speak to about all of this, of course. He's the leading law firm for this. He's proposing this new sweat equity route where the India founder takes a large chunk of the US entity in as sweat equity, right? Not as ESOP and not through an LLP, just directly in their personal name. Right? So it's an interesting route. I don't know how well thoroughly tested it is, but he's certainly pushing that way, and he's my lawyer. He's the most trusted lawyer in this space, so so I would go with his advice on that. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Just wanted to sort of
Sure.
get some reassurance on that.
Yeah, sure, brilliant. Okay, folks, please post any questions on the Q&A or raise your hand. Happy to take more. Otherwise, I'll continue to the next topic. Yeah. Okay, let's dive ahead. So we talked about fundraising. So again, ping me on those if you have any doubts or questions around those. We talked a little bit about incorporation. We talked about the reasons to flip. All right, now let's talk about, well, there's two more topics I want to touch on. This is go-to market. And then did any of the recent union budget changes impact cross-border founders, right? I call these cross-border founders who have a US parent but live in India, right? Yeah, Gaurav has a question. Gaurav? Gaurav, I'm clicking on unmute for you, and you should be able to unmute now. Gaurav, you'll have to unmute.
Am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you, Gaurav. Yeah, please go ahead. Oh, now you've muted yourself.
Yeah,
Now I
hello,
can-
sir. Yeah, so I'm Gaurav Kumar Tiwari, like I'm currently pursuing BTech and everything. And I'm working on a startup also. So I got an investment of 1 CR. So it like from the mediator, like one mediator has to get the offer. So is it good to go with them?
Gaurav, your voice is not clear, unfortunately. Can you just quickly repeat that?
Gaurav, please type your
Hello,
question
sir.
on chat.
Am I
so
audible?
that,
Yeah,
we
try
don't
try
get-
once more, Gaurav. Otherwise, type it out. But try once more speaking.
Am I audible?
Yeah, I can hear you. Try once more speaking, and then we'll see if I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm working on a startup idea, and I got an investment offer of 1 CR from an Abu Dhabi investment offer, like his SGA Ventures, and I got it from an mediator. So is it good to go with them? Like, what's your experience? What do you suggest?
Okay, you got an offer for 1 crore investment from Abu Dhabi fund or angel?
Like, it's SGI Ventures. It's an Abu Dhabi associate.
I don't know them, but fine. And you're an Indian private limited company. Have you already set up an entity?
Yeah, like company incorporation is still in process. Like within 2 weeks, company will be registered in India itself.
Okay, and what does your company focus on? What is the nature of your company?
It's a fintech based startup, sir. It's a fintech based startup.
And is it India
Can I?
building for Bharat or building for, you know, India One, or you building for the US? So what are you building for?
It's for India only, sir. Like I am building for the stock market. Like my company is totally based on stock.
Yeah, the Indian stock market, and the customer is an Indian consumer, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, then for you, I think it's clear. Just you know, for someone like you, an Indian founder building for Bharat with an India-based product and an India focus of India, it's clear, you know, like your first market is India, your largest market is India. I would look at it that way, you know. If your first market was India, but your larger market was US, I'd say differently. Or if your first market was US and larger market was US, I'd say differently. But for you, your first market is India and your larger market is India. I think for
India. Yeah. Yes, sir.
you, India holding company makes a lot of sense. And for you to accept investment from overseas investors, there are some small issues involved around it, but it's absolutely possible. And it's actually more their headache than your headache. So they will have to do some thinking around that.
Okay. Okay, got it, sir.
Cool. Okay. Any other questions? Please ping or raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm gonna touch on a couple of other topics here. Okay, let's touch on go-to-market, right? The way I see go-to-market, in fact, that's it. Let me talk briefly about the union budget, right? Again, I'm not a tax advisor, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a CA. I just have perspectives on these things from a founder's perspective, right? Did the cross-border founders get impacted by the union budget, right? I look at 5 aspects and I tell you that some of them did affect, right? Kind of. This 5267B angel tax, this means that companies who incorporate in India, right, are now subject to, the investors are subject to angel tax if the investor is a non-resident investor. Right? That's a new change. And this, angel tax was already applicable on India-based investors. The only way out was to be a Startup India registered. Right? You can't be Startup India registered if you're a subsidiary of a foreign company. Right? So that's kind of one of the considerations here, is that this will encourage founders to perhaps think about incorporating abroad if they're seeking investment from foreign investors. ATIAC, this is interesting. It just means that India private limited companies incorporating in India, they have a nice bunch of tax rebates and benefits, and the deadline for that has been extended by a year. If you incorporate by any time in the next 12 months, you're eligible for that. So that's a nice extension. It makes it more attractive to incorporate your holdco in India. And then here, Section 79, you can now carry forward losses for 10 years instead of 7 years. So this is really good for India private limited companies as well. Yeah. So it kind of encourages, again, India level holdco. This one here, Section 54F, just means that if you exit and you have a bunch of exit proceeds, the amount that you can onward invest from those proceeds, your exit proceeds, is now limited to 10 crores. Yeah. So that's kind of an interesting perspective as well. And then finally, here we see the 20% TCS. Right? This is tax collected at source. Right? So now if a Indian angel wants to invest in a foreign company, right, a foreign, let's say a US holding company, he or she has to deduct or add 20% on top of that. So let's say they want to invest, let's say, I don't know, 10 lakhs in a US entity. They now have to reserve 12 lakhs, so 2 lakhs on top, and submit that 2 lakhs extra to the Indian government. So you can see for Indian resident angels who want to invest in foreign entities, it's getting a little complicated and they have to tie up more capital, right? Just to invest 10 lakhs, I have to expend 12 lakhs. Now, eventually I'll get that back when I file my tax filings and I get the exit back, but it's a pain, right? It takes years, right? So this definitely encourages founders to incorporate domestically in India if you're seeking money from Indian angels. So that was the union budget impact on cross-border founders. Some interesting aspects there. Okay. Again, raise your hands if you have any questions on these points, or feel free to post on the question. All right, let's touch on GTM. GTM means go to market, right? And the reason I talk about this is because it's super important about how you access your customers, right? So India-based holding company targeting, let's talk largely about US, right? Because that's kind of where my expertise is, at least. Right? If you're targeting US global startups, I think if you're an Indian entity, it's fine. If you're a B2B product, targeting these as your customers, right? Target customers, we should say, right? This is what I do. I target global startups as my customers. This is an easy audience to sell to. They understand software. They're willing to try things out. They're early adopters, etc. This market is much harder to access. You don't really need to set foot on the ground, but you do need a very strong GTM strategy around distribution. Right? This is the backbone of America, right? 7 million small businesses in America that just keeps the American economic engine running, right? And hard to access unless you have an expertise, an SEO strategy, a large-scale distribution strategy, or a viral or network for FX strategy. Right? But it's super big, right? It's absolutely a $1 trillion market. Right? The US mid market, I would say largely this is a function of having some level of domain expertise. Let's say a vertical SaaS, like let's say the construction industry in the US, right? So you need some expertise there, or you need some way of getting to that market there with domain expertise, I would say. And then US enterprise, I largely think that startups trying to target US enterprises whilst being resident in India, that's a hard sell, right? Most enterprises will demand SOC 2, ISO certification, or will demand early proof of concept, or just give you a letter of interest and try a pilot with you. Very hard to get nailed down. Sales cycles are months, if not longer, whereas sales cycles with SMEs can be minutes, right? So really a tough play to access US enterprises. But it's huge ticket size, right? If you manage to access, and I think it's a very interesting play. And eventually, of course, the CEO will have to move to the US, especially for enterprise focus, if not start from the US. Generally, I see CTO staying back though. The CTO stays, runs the tech division here, and the CEO would move very quickly to the US for enterprise plays. Now let's look at where your holding company is, right? And the same with regards to all four of those scenarios. So if you're an Indian entity targeting global startups, fairly straightforward, just set up some level of strong payment networks. You can receive funding. You can do that with things like Payoneer and things like that, even PayPal. Indian entity targeting US SMEs, that's slightly harder because US SMEs want to just pay on some easy domestic payment method such as check, bank transfer, like that. It's much harder to actually target those. US mid-market, they'll almost definitely want you to be incorporated in the US, so this is tough. US enterprise will definitely want you to have a US entity, so this is even tougher. And then obviously, if you're a US entity, targeting all four of these is much easier in any which way. So I think probably there's a lot of effects impacting here about where you're incorporated and what you're targeting and who you're targeting. Okay, I'll take a pause there. Any questions on this? Cool. Sounds like sounds like everyone's had all their questions answered. Is that right?
Once again, requesting the participants, here's your chance to ask questions. Don't miss out on it. Do ask your questions.
Cool. I'm going to recap again on everything we spoke about, and we'll try to wrap up. So we have the scenarios of, why do folks, let's say founder perspective, why to incorporate in US, right? We talked about those things, right? And why and where, right? And it depends largely on these, right? These factors such as access, payment ease, like that. We talked about the phone pay reverse flip considerations and the unicorns in India, right? Thinking about reverse flipping. We talked about ODI changes and how that impacted the ability to incorporate in the US and which routes to use. And I think it's coming down to kind of the LLP route now. We talked about a go-to-market strategy. We talked about a US fundraising strategy, depending on where you're raising from and what it's for and where your focus is and what your access is. We talked a lot about go-to-market just now, depending on which sectors you're targeting. And then, of course, we targeted, we spoke a bit about the unit impact budget changes. So I've kind of flown through this very fast and I appreciate it's complicated stuff, but yeah. Is there, Manohar saying, is there any way to get data on these categories of markets? Manohar, like there's data out there, research reports, there's an endless number of research reports, but it's such a vast market. I think it largely depends on what you're doing, right? If you're, targeting SMEs, then yeah, there's plenty of data out there. The US government itself has a huge amount of data that it publishes through its through its Treasury Department, right? Through economic statistics. Yeah, so I would say there's data out there. Dara says, can I elaborate on the LRS and ODI restrictions? Yeah. So LRS is liberalized remittance scheme. It was a scheme for angels in India and sorry, consumers in India to invest overseas or spend money overseas on anything. It used to be $250,000. Sorry, still is a $250,000 per year across all your Indian bank accounts may be remitted out of India, right? And $250,000 covered everything. It covered buying a house abroad. It covered sending your kids to university abroad. It covered spending on medical emergencies abroad. It covered, buying US stocks. It covered, angel investing abroad. It covered everything. $250,000 across all your Indian bank accounts per year, reset every 31st of March. Now, LRS used to be automatic. You just do it, right? The bank won't even ask. Right? You have to monitor whether you beat the threshold or not because only you know how many bank accounts you have. Right? Now, some of LRS is coming under ODI, right? Overseas direct, the investment out of India. Right? Now, the LRS component that comes under ODI is the angel component. And even public investing component for public markets and private markets, i.e. public and private entities. So now if you're investing in a private, in a US Delaware C Corp and you're an Indian angel, that's actually come under ODI now, right? So now you actually have to get your bank to approve it. And the bank may ask you, what are you investing in? Show me the documents, right? The bank, forex dealer, local nodal forex dealer, branch relationship manager will ask you for that. They will also require you to file an annual performance review, ODI APR, right, and performance review of that ODI. So it's kind of a little bit more onerous now, right? So if that makes sense. Okay, Dara is asking any specific restrictions an investor should be aware of if the transaction is in crypto industry. Yeah, I'm not an expert in crypto, but what I do know is that Indian government's coming down hard on crypto sectors. Largely what I've seen is that many of them are incorporated in Singapore, and now the founders are pretty much all looking at incorporating in Dubai, not even US, Dubai, United Arab Emirates, simply because it's become an extremely friendly place to do that. So, but Singapore was the place, and now it's kind of reduced in importance. Cool. So I think we answered all those. Yeah, and I summarized some of the things. So I hope that was helpful. And Elson and Raksha, I think folks have exhausted their questions here. So yeah.
Yeah, looks like that. Thank you so much, Anand, for spending time with us and sharing your knowledge about the domain.
Sure.
Anyone, one last time, any questions? Otherwise, I think we're good to wrap up.
Yeah, please ping me on LinkedIn. Anyone who needs to reach out, I'm easily accessible, or through my company. Cool.
Oh, we did get questions again.
Oh, we did. Okay, here we go.
Yeah. So for an Indian angel investing in a US startup, how does the process look like for the TCSPs?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't know the exact answer to this, but what I do know is that TCS is applicable now. Okay? So yeah, you will have to set aside 20% when you're investing in foreign private companies. I think your CA would be best placed to advise you. And largely, I caveat my entire talk by saying, I'm not a CA, I'm not a tax professional, I'm an entrepreneur, and I have an understanding simply because I've done this a few times and I've seen hundreds of my customers doing it. So I caveat everything by saying, get professional tax advice. I'm not giving tax advice, but I certainly can give you trends from my perch where I'm sitting. So, cool. All right. So I think that's it's come to the end, and so I appreciate having the opportunity to interact with you all. And big thank you to iStart Rajasthan as well, of course, for hosting us, and of course to Let's Venture and Scalix for hosting me. So thank you.
Have a great evening. Thank you everyone for participating actively.
Thanks, Raksha. Thanks, Elson, for inviting me.